So I do believe that there are slides here, right? So should I just start talking? Oh, amazing. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me on your Friday afternoon or your Friday evening, right? I'm sure that there are so many more exciting things that you could be doing on a Friday evening than talking to me about your potential careers in esports. But thankfully, the government has made it fit to keep everybody at home and everybody safe today. So it's nice to meet you guys out there on the internet, and I'd love to go to the next slide. So it's nice to meet you. My name is Chris Tran, and I'm lucky enough to be head of esports for Riot Games in Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau. I've been with the company for 5 years, 2 months, 22 days so far. And even though I was born and raised an American, I am deeply connected to the region, especially Vietnam, where I lived in Vietnam for 14 years, and I'm fluent in Vietnamese. And before I was working for Riot, I was in consulting and in advertising. And I'll probably touch a little bit about how I went from consulting and advertising into gaming a little bit later. Next slide, please. All right. So I do not know if you guys know, but we are from Riot Games, and we have we used to be the biggest indie game company with a game named League of Legends. And in 2020, in the backdrop of some unfortunate global public health crises, we launched several new games. So we launched Legends of Runeterra, Valorant, and Wild Rift, so that we could actually call ourselves Riot Games. And next slide. And with that, we actually are one of the leading esports companies in the world. And League of Legends is one of the biggest esports in the world, with tons of professional teams across 12 global regions. We have 3 global tournaments, but we are an esport that our viewership numbers are actually starting to compete with some of the premier and iconic traditional sports titles. So we're not quite at the at the FIFA World Cup number or the Super Bowl number yet, but we're working really hard to kind of change that narrative. Next slide. And of course, with our new games in 2020 comes new esports. So in 2021, we see the launch of the Valorant Champions Tour and the Wild Rift Icon Series in Southeast Asia. Next slide. So League of Legends was our first esport, and honestly, launching our second esport, we really weren't sure if we were gonna be able to do the same thing twice. And so far, so good. And we've seen that we had 1 million concurrent viewers at Valorant Masters 2 in Iceland, and in SCA alone, we had 3 million esports hours. So we have been lucky to find a great product, both for players to enjoy playing and also enjoy watching in Southeast Asia, especially in huge markets like Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand. Next slide. But suffice it to say, our own homebred Wild Rift Icon series is doing quite well as well. We've had over 54 teams participate at the highest levels for Wild Rift. We've had over 1 million daily unique views, and we have 11 regional sponsors. So it's early days for the Icon series, and we're really optimistic. And no offense, but right after this interview, I'm going to be jumping back in and watching some Wild Rift Icon series action myself. So it's out there. And next slide. Right. About a month ago, we finished and crowned the summer season, the initial summer season, the first international competition for Wild Rift by crowning EVOS Esports as a champion of the Summer Super Cup. Next slide. But let's talk about esports, right, as a business, because there's the spectator and the fan experience, but at the end of the day, when you're talking about a career, you actually want to talk about how big the industry is. And the industry is big, but booming. So it's $1 billion industry now, but almost going to double by the end of the year. And even before the pandemic, it was already like doing quite well. Next slide. And our unique approach to esports has really changed the nature of the conversation with partners. So, of course, we work with endemic sponsors like HyperX and with the Secret Lab. But 2 years ago, we actually brought in Louis Vuitton and an iconic sponsorship with one of the premier luxury fashion houses in the world. Next slide. I'm getting tired of saying next slide. I'll make up new words. But besides that, institutionally and with government organizations, we see that there's just broad recognition that esports is actually a noble kind of career and a noble pursuit where nations and our esports athletes should stand shoulder to shoulder with traditional sports athletes. I know the Olympics are happening now, and unfortunately the SEA Games are being postponed till next year, as far as we know. But 2021 was supposed to be a watershed moment for SEA, where we have Wild Rift and League of Legends and a female-only category for Wild Rift at the SEA Games. And in 2022, esports will become a medaled event at the Hangzhou Asian Games. Next slide, please. Okay, so we were growing fast before, but COVID just accelerated our growth. So here are some numbers that just talks about that. And I think people who are not in the industry think of it as a temporary bump, saying, oh, when COVID goes away, and honestly, it cannot come sooner, that this bump will go away. But what we see internally and what we see from third-party research is that it is not a temporary bump, but actually an acceleration to a future state. So we see that the growth now is likely to be sustainable for the long term once we get past this unfortunate blip in history. May I proceed to the next slide, please? All right. So let's talk about why we're really here, right? Let's talk about having a career in esports. And let's be honest, the only way you can get in esports is by being the best person at a game, right? So if you're not good at the game, you guys should probably disconnect. Next slide. Kidding, right? Because it's not, to have a career in esports, you should not think about it as being good at the game. And it's not that you have to be a professional or you have to study games development in university. I'll tell you, I am not a very good gamer in any of our games of League of Legends or Teamfight Tactics or especially Valorant or Wild Rift. I do enjoy playing, but I am probably one of the worst people in my office at playing these games. I have never studied game development, yet some people might say that I've done quite well in my gaming career. I remember when I was applying for my job at Riot, I was terrified that the final round of interviews would be me versus 4 other people in a massive ARAM type battle. So I hired a coach to teach me how to play League of Legends better. Luckily, that didn't happen because I probably would have lost. But that's a common misconception I think a lot of people have. Next slide. Right. So it takes not just a village to create an esport and to be in gaming, but actually a miniature city itself. Our headquarters in Los Angeles, we actually call a campus, which has similar DNA attributes to a university, more so a university than actually like an office building. So we have art departments and we have an audio studio. One of the jokes that we always see on the internet is Riot is actually a music company that happens to make some games, right? We do consumer products licensing. We have a TV show coming out at the end of the year. We have writers, we have lawyers, we have accountants, etc. We have a lot of room for a lot of experts underneath a big tent. And if you are not a game developer or a professional player, don't discount yourself from being part of, following your passion and doing something amazing. Next slide. Right? Because they're not just esports is big and growing, there are things around the corner that will just accelerate and expand and amplify that growth. Mobile gaming, in Singapore and Southeast Asia, we think of mobile gaming as, and of course, but the rest of the world is a bit slower in understanding that mobile phones will make gaming ubiquitous. Likewise, as 5G is rolled out across the world, we're going to find new use cases and new kinds of games that we don't currently have. And COVID has taught us that we can have hybrid events, both online and offline, at the same time, and deliver new experiences that people hadn't considered not only to be great, but to redefine what an esports experience can be. And that's part of my job now. So if anybody has any good ideas, I'm all ears. Next slide. Right. But beyond that, I think the truly exciting thing for me personally is that I'm here in Singapore, because my mission is to really explore and understand how Singapore can be a leader, not just in the region, but maybe in the world, on esports. Next slide. All right. So I think it's about building your career in esports, but I think for the vast majority of people here are like, how do I get into esports? For me, when I was looking to join Riot, I realized that I had zero game experience, right? And I joined 5 years ago. So I did a couple things. One, I hired that League of Legends coach to teach me how to play. Two, I I reached out to a friend of mine to teach me how to interview for a gaming company. And the third thing is I actually hired a research company to do some special research for me in Vietnam. I'm not saying that you should do all of those things, but there is the demonstrating a skill set and also being humble and curious enough to know that there's a lot of things that I do not know, and how to arm myself for that interview to have a positive and productive conversation with people who I am interviewing with. Next slide. Right. So there are like different character traits that I think people need to consider, right? Be good at a skill. And there are skills that, like I said, esports and gaming is a big tent, so there's room for a lot of people and a lot of skills in there. Of course, two, you have to be interested in gaming, because a lot of times we have to be very tenacious and stubborn to change the way the world looks at gaming. So that passion is what really helps take us from where we are today to where we want gaming and esports to be in 20, 30, 50 years. But beyond that, we need to be really humble. I read a quote earlier today where it said essentially, when you are learning to do something, you can never look good at it. And with esports, we are inventing it along the way. So there are a lot of times where we will not be perfect. We're trying to build something new, and we have to listen to our audience, our fans, to see if the things that we do are better than the things that we did yesterday. Or are we just kind of wasting everybody's time? And you need to be able to dream big, right? The goal of esports, the goal of Riot, and the goal of a lot of the professionals in the industry goes a little bit beyond entertaining somebody for like 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week. It's more like building the world that we wish we had when we were growing up, where people could connect via games and have a shared cultural moment. And as we shift the way the world looks at gaming and bring it into the mainstream, you have to dream big. You have to be humble. You have to be passionate, and you have to be good at what your job is, right? Next slide. Right. So it's on for questions, which I think is the more fun part. We have a bunch of questions here. I'm getting feedback that I'm talking a little fast. So I'll try to talk a little slow. So the first question, I'll just read them out and then I'll answer. Esports degrees and qualifications don't really exist. So what would you suggest to help a fresh graduate stand out to companies? So I think when there isn't a way that is apparent, the people who can learn how to cut their way through the noise and the jungle will stand out. What I mean there is a fresh graduate, if they're a fresh graduate and they don't have a portfolio or have any experience, then they're not going to stand out. I think by the time, if you want to be a fresh graduate that applies to a game company, you should be experimenting and trying to do your own things along the way. Um, for example, if you are a designer, is there an esports team in Singapore or locally or an esports club that you could start designing logos or merchandise for, etc., so you have a portfolio to share? There's a lot of things that you can do as a university student that both builds your resume but also increases your skill level to make it easier for us to have a productive conversation. Um, I interview and talk to a lot of people who want to join the gaming industry, and they they invariably say they want to join the gaming industry because they love games. And I have to be candid with them sometimes, and just say, yeah, I love to eat. That doesn't mean I should open a restaurant, right? But if I like really tried to like learn how to cook a lot and like competed at MasterChef, that would be a different kind of narrative to me opening a restaurant. So thinking about how that works for you might be a good way for somebody who is in school or somebody who just graduated can do that in the part-time while they're working in someplace else. Next question. How do you feel about the longevity about the esports industry? Is it just a buzzword right now, or what do you see in the future of esports? As people get to know me, I'm a bit of a troll. So I kind of want to say, well, I think the industry is going to crash tomorrow, and that's why I'm in it. But I would not say that to you guys. So let's pretend I did not say that. I think we are at the very beginning of the next evolution of sports. So I don't think I think we do it a disservice by saying esports industry is a separate thing. It is just a natural transition from sports to esports. It's kind of like how maybe 70, 80 years, sports started being announced on the radio, and then radio went on the television, and each time the sports changed, right? And so I think esports and technology will continue to grow. I think the big question a lot of esports professionals think about is, what is the longevity of a game, right? Is the esport game that I'm working on, is that going to be around in 5, 10, 20, 30 years? And is my skill set going to be applicable for different things? And you're going to find that for the most part, if you are a professional, you're an esports professional doing broadcasts or doing narrative or creating content for League of Legends, and later on you decide, oh, I don't want to do League of Legends anymore and I want to go do something with Valorant, etc., those skills are portable. And I think those skills will be very important for a long time coming. Next question. What do you look for when hiring marketing comms talent? Is relevant experience in esports and gaming crucial in getting hired, or does Riot look for relevant experience but not in the same field? Great question. We look for both, right? I think we like having a professional who is good in marketing or communications, but also experience in esports gaming is, of course, what we want, right? If there's a marketing and comms person who wants to get into gaming and esports but does not have the experience, then that's a little bit of a nuanced conversation where we would actually try to understand a bit about the motivation of why they like esports, what kind of intrinsic kind of traits and passions and curiosity they already have versus, and I'll be totally candid, versus somebody who just is a little bit more mercenary, says, oh, I'm really good at marketing and I hear gaming's big, right? I think this is where that passion point and being a gamer is very important. Those are the questions I have so far, so happy to hear more. Oh, new questions. I have a question. I'm guessing that I know who's asking this question, by the way. At this moment, I'm an esports production broadcast manager in Indonesia. I really want to know, how do you serve SEA market in esports broadcast, since it's really diverse and a huge market of audience and fans? The how is very complicated, but essentially we work with a network of partners all across the region. So in Indonesia, for instance, we work with OneUp Esports, and OneUp helps us with our Wild Rift and Valorant Esports with the Icon Series and the Valorant Champions Tour. So imagine that in the many markets that we have different partners who help us operate our local esports organizations. And then as the champions of those various leagues or tournaments arise, then we start sending them forth into international competition. And as we go into international competition like Valorant Masters or with the Wild Rift Summer Super Cup or the upcoming SEA Champs, we continue to localize and broadcast in Bahasa, in Thai, in Mandarin, in Vietnamese, in Thai, etc., to our local our local fans. What we are hoping to see, and we've seen deeper esports, is that there is a transition from local fandom to international fandom as you get higher skilled matches. So, like League of Legends fans in Vietnam will watch other regions' teams compete, whereas with Valorant and with Wild Rift, we're right at the beginning. So having strong local partners like OneUp or Mineski in the Philippines are really important to us. Next question. How do you determine whether a skill or expertise is necessary from esports from just a resume? We can't, right? We look at a resume to filter those who we think would be good in an interview, and then we have experts in different crafts to really understand how proficient a candidate is within the interview. A resume is something where we want people to show us just enough information that we know that we are fairly confident that we can have a useful conversation with them about their craft and about their passion and about their career objectives. Oftentimes, people make it hard on their resumes where they give us too much information that doesn't apply. Or on the flip side, not enough information. So we have to play Sherlock Holmes a little bit and do some detective work to try to understand if they really are a good fit or not. And the harder a candidate makes it for us to judge what their experience level is, the less likely it is that they're going to get an interview. This is why portfolios help a lot. And yeah, I don't think we snoop around social media besides going to LinkedIn. Right? Because I think LinkedIn is kind of the gold standard for us to just understand if there's any additional information outside of a resume. But if you're expecting that I'm going to go to your Twitter or your Instagram to try to figure out what you've done, I think you're not going to be very happy with that result. Next question. I can also give bad dating advice too. So, what is the career growth like in a game development company like Riot? Like, what happens when you start from a junior role, right? I want to say that career growth starting in a junior role at Riot is probably similar to career growth in other companies. And when I say that, when I was in consulting, and what I've seen within advertising is that you learn a core skill set as a junior, but then there comes a point when you need to specialize into a specific thing. And in different companies, there are different ways to achieve that specialization. But as a junior, you really don't have a lot of input on the direction that you have. So I have seen, and I know really successful senior people at Riot who joined Riot 10 years ago as interns, and now they're sitting in fairly significant management positions in Los Angeles now. But I also know that a lot of people who spend their junior time at Riot parlay that into more senior positions and jump a level or two levels by going to other companies. And I think that's not something that is unique to the gaming industry or esports, but that's just what happens for that's just what happens in all structured companies in general. If you want to learn fast, join a small startup. If you want to have like career longevity, join a big company, but you're not going to grow nearly as quickly. I think with that, we're probably good for the our questions for the time, right? I want to thank everybody so much for taking their Friday evening to hang out with this old man.